Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to CI Radio. This is Ulama in Focus. My name is Ibrahim Musa. It's just after 9 p.m. here in South Africa, and it's just after noon in California. We're joined by our very special guest once again. Joining us via Skype is Muhammad Ghilan. He's a writer, neuroscience PhD candidate, and a student of Islamic jurisprudence, theology, and philosophy. His take on the selfie phenomena, its reporting in the mainstream media, and the sort of introspection that needs to be now taking place within our societies. Muhammad, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thanks for having me on your program.
Excellent. Thank you so much for once again availing yourself to discuss issues of importance to the Ummah. Were you surprised at the sort of coverage that this phenomena received this year? Was it like, just a journalistic decision? Every year we need to cast the Hajj in a particular way, and this is the lead angle we're going to be taking for the Hajj. Or do you think it's an accurate reflection of what's happening on the ground, and therefore it needs to be spoken about, needs to be reported about?
I found it actually very interesting because the so-called selfie phenomena has been going on for a few years now. This is not the first year that Muslims have been taking selfies at Hajj. But for whatever reason, maybe it's just the current events that we're going through, the Muslims need to be cast in a particular light. We're in the spotlight for the media because of what's going on in the Middle East right now. Whatever it is, for some reason this year they decided that selfies need to get some coverage. Allahu A'lam.
Well, and it certainly did get its fair deal of coverage. We could, look at it in a negative sense or a positive sense, but the positive thing that can come out of this is the introspection that needs to be happening within our societies, moving away from a victim mentality and looking at whether there is seriously a problem within ourselves and our approach to technology, and what needs to be done about it. Do you agree with that?
Definitely. I was actually just thinking about this the other day, and it seems that the more we try to be, the more we neglect talking about our tradition to people and try to spread the teachings, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts us in a position where we're forced to do it. Whether be it through the actions of these groups in the Middle East, where we have to come out now and defend and explain what Islam is, because before we weren't doing it. Or now through this selfie phenomenon, where a lot of the articles that have been written about it actually were not made by Muslims, they were made by skeptics and anti-theists, not just atheists, ones that attack religion, and they were basically making fun of it. So it forces us into a position of, well, can we talk about this and reflect on what we're doing? So it does have some positive that comes out of it.
Yeah, are we to be surprised? We as Muslims in general, we found that certain traditional practices that have long been eroded in other religions, other forms of belief and other lifestyles, we've managed by and large to hold on to some of these traditional practices. But when it comes to selfies, some of the ill effects of technology, we seem to be just in the same pack as everybody else, if not plunge deeper into the phenomenon than anyone else. Why is this so? Is this something that we should be surprised, shocked about?
This is an interesting phenomenon for us Muslims. While we do hold on to tradition, we're at the same time trying to get away from it and try to fit in with the times. One example that I was told to reflect on, there's a practice in philosophy about just reducing things to the absurd, which is just try to induce the practice to everything and see if it holds up validity. And the example I was given was, can you imagine a Catholic at Mass on Sunday going to get the bread from the priest, and then telling the priest, well, can you hold on just for a second, and then pulls out their iPhone and takes a selfie while they get the bread put into their mouth and just, taking that picture. The picture is just, you can't even imagine it. Like, nobody would think that someone would do that. Nevertheless, when we try to bring it up, we have a lot of Muslims rise up and saying, no, we're just trying to share pictures, we're trying to do this. But there's really not much reflection at a deeper level. Like, what does this mean? Are we just going along with the fad? If you go on Instagram, for example, where a lot of these images came out from, and look at the selfies and the context that they're put in, and then all of a sudden you have, amongst all of these, say, lewd images that come up, you have this one picture of a Muslim in front of the Kaaba. And that Muslim hasn't really thought about, like, what does this practice mean? that I'm doing the selfie here. And now we're being pushed on it now in the media, and we shouldn't just reject it in a reactionary way. We should actually reflect: have we just gone along with the masses on this? Is there something wrong with this practice?
That's obviously the question that we're asking ourselves this evening. There is a very interesting article. You mentioned a lot of the criticism, Mohammed, that has come out on this particular practice, as in actually come from critics in the West itself. For example, one that you had posted by Andrew Keen, who's written a lot of books on the subject of the internet and why there's so many dangers that are perhaps inherent in the way the internet is today. He has written something quite interesting. The sacred has been turned on its head in a world where tech has allowed narcissism to run riot. In our selfie culture, we now think of the world as revolving around us. Usually, traditionally, we think about everything revolving around the Kaaba being the center of our faith. That's quite an interesting concept, how we've inverted the tables to consider ourselves, perhaps not explicitly but implicitly, to be holy, to be of such importance that everything else seems to have paled into oblivion.
This is a crucial point here about this practice. And before we get into it, something that needs to be made clear is that this is not about the legality of this issue. I'm not interested in the legal discussion of is it permissible or impermissible to do this. I'm interested in the meaning behind it. For us Muslims, we focus so much on what is halal and what is haram that we forget about why is something halal, why is something haram. What's the point behind the practice? Now, when it comes to this idea of taking selfies, I gave a talk in Washington with the Medina Institute back in April, and it was about narcissism and social media. And the way that scholars define narcissism in this field of social media research, they define it as an inflated sense of and a grandiose sense of self-concept. It's self-promotion, vanity, grandiosity, just thinking too much of oneself. And a crucial component of a narcissist, whether you recognize you're a narcissist or not, is that you need that to be the center of attention. And that's really what the selfie is about. The selfie takes all of your surroundings and makes them revolve around you. You're the center of attention. It is different from the act of having someone take a picture of you where there's a scenery behind you or around you. There's a crucial difference between that and you doing it to yourself and you taking that center of attention. And so this is a kind of a side effect of using social media, that we just go along and we just do these practices without realizing how it affects our personality and how it's affecting ourself. And when you go to Mecca, this act of Hajj, and you go and revolving around the Kaaba and doing these things, if you're taking the picture post, just later on, you're just touring around and stuff, that's one thing. But to do it while you're just finishing an act of worship, like Hajj or Umrah, and you had just gone around the Kaaba, and to take the Kaaba itself and reduce it into an image like this, there's a book by Abdurrahman Badawi, Dr. Abdurrahman Badawi. He wrote it back in 1945, and the book is Min Tarikh al-Ilhad fil Islam, from the history of atheism in Islam. And in it, he talks about the difference in art, because if we really take it down, boil it down to its essential nature, when we look at these images, we're talking about art. He said there is a difference between the art of the Westerner and the art of the Muslims. The art of the Muslims was not an embodied art. If you go travel around the world to the Western world, you'll see that their history, the art was always about statues, sculptures, images drawn up. That was the art that they embodied. Whereas for us, for Muslims, the thing that defined Muslim architecture was the arabesque. These patterns, these repeating patterns, which are disembodied. And the thing about them is that they're so disembodied that they actually disembody the thing that they're drawn on, where the wall that they're drawn on no longer seems like a wall anymore. You get lost in it. We have a big thing about the abstract in Islamic theology, that whatever occurs to your mind about the divine reality is other than that. But when we get involved, when we take our acts of worship and our sacred and take it and reduce it into an embodied image, and to top it off, put it in an image where it's not even the center anymore, you're the center, that actually puts the focus on something that the act of Hajj is trying to efface. Hajj is about effacing the self. You leave the world behind and you go to Mecca and you seek forgiveness, and it's Hajj is a reenactment of what happens on the Day of Judgment. That's what all of Hajj is about. And to bring an iPhone or a Samsung and take a picture and do that, there's something about it that negates the purpose of it. And it can actually take your spiritual state down from where it's supposed to be. So it's not really about halal or haram, it's just what is the meaning of this act and how is it affecting you as a person and your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
And there's interesting perspectives on this, the deeper significance, the inner dimensions of Islamic worship that perhaps we can discuss if we look at the writings and the teachings of scholars of our past, like Imam al-Ghazali. But one common thing that has come up, Muhammad, and I see, many of the postings that we've put, or many of the questions we've asked our listeners, for instance, on social media, this seems to be a common response, at least from some quarters. I'll just read you a typical response. Somebody just wrote a few minutes ago on our page, I don't think it's wrong as such. If you're alone and there's no one there to take a pic, you do it yourself. And I think this is the key, the next statement. Also, a remembrance if you take your own pics. Now, people are saying this is an epic journey. We only get to do it once in a lifetime. What's wrong with just taking that solitary pic that we can, forever reminisce about? That seems to be a common train of argument. What's your response to that?
My response to that would be something like what Sheikh Hamza Yusuf said, something very profound when he was in his tour in Malaysia just recently, where he made a comment about taking pictures. And every time I've been in the presence of Sheikh Hamza or seen him talk, he always brings this up because people take a lot of pictures, and he mentioned that he actually doesn't have any pictures with any of his shuyukh, except for those that were taken by professional photographers who happened to be around at the time. And he doesn't even look at those. The pictures are present within his heart, and that's really the point. When you go to Hajj, yeah, it's an epic journey, I recognize that. And again, we're not talking about what's wrong and what's right here. I'm just talking about something beyond that. If you're present and in the moment enough, you actually would not need to have an externalization of your memory. And that's really what these pictures are about. It's taking the memory from within you and putting it external to you, onto something outside of you. So the meaning of it is negated inside of you. Now, just this morning, I was reflecting on my grandmother, may Allah have mercy on her soul, just moments that we used to have together. I don't have pictures with me and my grandmother. I just realized that this morning as I was preparing for this. But yet, I had these moments where I could just sit back and reflect, and I was exercising my mind to remember those moments where I would make her laugh so loud that our neighbors would hear. And that was emotional enough for me and moved me enough. I remember the moments when I'm standing in front of the Kaaba and just feeling the awe and the presence of where I'm at, and feeling even shy a little bit to look at the Kaaba because of where I'm at. I just being present and in the moment over there. And it's really unfortunate that this is lost from from a lot of Muslims, on a lot of Muslims. To just stay like, listen, just put these things aside for a minute and just sit down and be just present, and negate yourself. And that's one thing I mentioned. Hajj is about fana. It's the negation of the self, the effacement of the self, not about the baqa, of yourself on social media and Instagram. Nevertheless, if people want to do that, that's their business. People have their own thing. I'm not questioning intentions here. We're not questioning the legality of it. Like I said, I'm just trying to get to a point of, are you connecting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through your act of worship in a way that could be reduced when you bring in technology like this? Are you really experiencing what you should be experiencing and really present? And that's another thing. We talk about the companions and the people of the past having great memories. Well, one of the reasons they had great memories is because a lot of them were illiterate. They didn't have the tool to write down these things, and so they focused. You focus when you know that you don't have a thing with you to record what you need to record. So you sit there and you're really attentive. People that record talks when they go on audio record, or they know that the recording is going to be available, look at them in the audience. They're always the most distracted people. because they know that they can go back later and check it out and go back and log in and see it. And chances are, for most of them, they don't actually log back in and see it.
Yeah, and obviously the quality, there's certain aspects that you can never capture in an audio recording or video recording or picture recording. These are elements that are unique to actually you being present there. You spoke, Mohammed, there about that post that you had your thoughts on this particular phenomena, and you quote Imam al-Ghazali dedicating pages in his Ihya showing how one can, for example, invalidate their fast while maintaining abstinence from food and drink. In other words, you fulfill the fiqhi, the jurisprudence part of it, the essentials as far as that act of ibadah, but still you might miss out on the essence of the ibadah itself. Like I think the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ mentions that some people get nothing from their fasting except hunger and thirst. So is this a similar thing, a similar analogy that can be extended to the Hajj with such behavior? One might be doing all the rules, all the rites, fulfilling all the rules, but still missing out on something much bigger.
I actually think a better analogy than the fast would be the prayer, because the Prophet ﷺ mentioned in a hadith that many people leave their prayer and they only got half of it, or a third of it, or a quarter of it, or an eighth of it, or none of it. Meanwhile, they have fulfilled all of the fiqh of it. The one about the fast would be more about, some people that will backbite, would engage in lewd behavior with things, and still they're fasting technically. But with prayer, what is the Prophet ﷺ talking about in the prayer, where you only get half of it, or a third of it, or a percentage of it? He's talking about your presence. You can stand in prayer, recite your Fatiha with perfect tajweed, recite your surah after it, you do your ruku', you do everything perfectly. It will be the most beautiful prayer you can ever perform. But you get none of it. And what's the point? You weren't present. You could do things automatically. And this is something that we know from neuroscience now, that when you train your limbs to a particular practice, it actually moves, the movement becomes procedural, which means it goes into your cerebellum, in the back of your head. It's no longer something that your frontal cortex needs to be fully engaged, where you're paying attention. And a lot of people, when they're learning, like converts, for example, are a great example of this. When they're first learning to pray, they speak of the difficulty at the beginning. Well, that difficulty is because they're conscious and they're paying attention and they're trying to do everything properly. But then at some point, they fall into the routine pattern where it just becomes procedure, where you can just walk and avoid obstacles without thinking about avoiding the obstacles, because your brain is just doing the activity for you. And so the same thing with Hajj. If you could do your Hajj and do everything, but were you present? Or were you concerned about recording what you were doing and having an externalized memory as opposed to an internalized memory? And that's the point. And I think the analogy with the prayer is actually even better than the analogy of the fasting, because presence is something that you cannot tell me you can capture in an Instagram photo.
So where to from your suggestion? I mean, we have also brought up this discussion of whether in some way stricter policing, imposition of fines and other such measures would perhaps serve as some means to perhaps get people not to, perhaps get people moving away from these practices. That's one idea that has been suggested, but that's an external measure. As far as people questioning themselves and introspecting internally, you suggest unplugging from social media, especially during these critical times. I mean, is it a practical idea, especially during a journey of this magnitude? Perhaps one needs to maintain some degree of communication, basic functionality on a cell phone, like calls or SMSs. Perhaps that would be fine, but just to avoid the temptation, does one just cut oneself out, remove this device at least for those few days, so that one can reap the benefits of Hajj?
A practice that I've been doing over the past couple of years during Ramadan. During Ramadan, except for this past year, I had to come back in because of what was happening in Gaza. But during Ramadan, I unplug. I'm away from Facebook, I'm away from Twitter, I'm away from social media. I don't even check the news that much. I try to unplug because it's a time that I feel that I need to focus more on my worship and my spiritual presence. And so it's what we'd say in Islamic theology would be khalwa. You know, you just go into a kind of a position of just kind of separation and isolation. And then I come back afterwards. Hajj is kind of the same thing, where you can maintain this basic functionality. I don't think that you should impose things externally on people, because whenever you have external measures like this, what you end up with is hypocrisy. If people are distracted, they're going to be distracted. A better option would be, there should be workshops about Hajj, starting, and not that don't focus on fiqh alone. You know, we do have workshops in the West, for example, before people go on Hajj, telling them what they need to do, and we review it before we go on Hajj. Hey, this is your actions, obligatory actions, sunnah actions. You should do this. You shouldn't do this. You should avoid this. That's fine, but part of these workshops should be just a spiritual preparation for people, so that when they go, they get the most out of it. Not just focusing on the legal alone. I totally disagree with any external enforcements. I like a statement that Ambassador Shabazz, Malcolm X's, may Allah have mercy on him, daughter, she was asked one time about her father, Malcolm X, and she was asked to say something that she remembered the most about him. And after thinking for a moment, she said the one thing she remembered about him was that he was the hardest on himself, but he never imposed anything upon anyone, and he always left the door open for people to go through it when they're ready. You never want to, the Prophet ﷺ said, أَوْغِلُوا فِي هَذَا الدِّينِ بِرَفْقِ, enter this religion gently. Not everybody is at the same level. Not everybody is expected to behave in the same way. Some people are just at a different station than others, and we have to acknowledge that and respect that, and let people come onto this on their own pace and evolve as they should evolve. And they will get there eventually. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants people to come closer, and as we take the initiative, and that's the point, we need to take the initiative. He brings us closer once we take the initiative. Some of us are chosen where He takes us completely and He brings us in. So I don't agree with external measures. I think there should be more education and spiritual preparation before Hajj. And from my experience, when I see people do that, when they get there, they're fine. Even with their iPhones beside them and they have this connection with people, they don't feel the need to get into it.
So getting to know the inner dimensions, the spiritual essence of the Hajj, that's more critical, obviously, than the overemphasis on fiqh, as important as it is, but that shouldn't be overemphasized. Muhammad, I thank you so much for speaking to us here and sharing those interesting perspectives on the selfie phenomenon. It's something that goes beyond Hajj itself, and therefore I think this discussion has wider relevance to other aspects of our ibadah and our faith, with these devices being accessible on a variety, in a variety of situations. We see it present, perhaps as we performed Eid al-Adha a moment ago. People, doing exactly the same thing with their udhiyah animals. People who could do it in Ramadan. So it occurs in so many different ways. And I think this discussion, the exact same principles that we've established in this discussion, would have relevance in all these other spheres as well. Shukran for your time. And have yourself a great day, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Jazakumullah khairan.
That's our special guest, Mohammed Ghilan, speaking to us live via Skype. He's a writer, neuroscience PhD candidate, student of Islamic jurisprudence, theology and philosophy, speaking to us from North America. We continue this discussion, local perspective, and I think taking off from where Mohammed had actually hinted at, which is the proper education before we leave. Once you go to the kingdom, once you're there, you cut away from home, you feel a sense of freedom that perhaps whenever you travel, you're away from, your constituency. Sometimes people do things when they travel that they would never ever perceive or never ever conceive doing at home, and as a result of that, some of these practices people tend to do much more freely when they away from the prying eyes of those who usually look over them. So we need to inculcate these values, these teachings, and the importance of not desecrating the holy places whilst we are at home during the Hajj preparation season, at Hajj classes and so forth. Mufti Zubair Bayat, inshallah, will take it up from there when we get back with him. He's the Amir of the Darul Ihsan Islamic Services Center.